Welcome everybody to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I am Josh Fenton, filling in for Kate Nagel. Kate Nagel is up with Mayor Lorza and Superintendent of Schools for Providence, and I believe Police Chief Hugh Clements at a press conference right now talking about the strike that we're expecting tomorrow in the Providence school bus drivers, a loggerheads that's been building for weeks. With me today is Chris Millea, candidate for state representative, District 16 in Cranston, a hotbed race. It is a hotbed race, running against Representative Lancia. You're in the district adjacent to Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello. Your mayor's running for governor. It's all going on in Cranston.
Seems to be the place to be.
It is the place. It's certainly the place to run for office. This is your second whack at it?
It is. It is.
You ran 2 years ago. You lost. How close was it?
It was 70 votes out of almost 6,900 votes.
70 votes out of 6,900. How many of those people are you still mad at 2 years later?
About 70.
About 70. Speaking as a person who won a city council race by 16 votes, 9 people flipping, you get a great appreciation of what the value of going door to door is, right?
You know, I'm going to door, and it literally, though, is every vote counts. And you have to tell people that. And people who don't think their vote counts, my race, many other races clearly show that.
Maybe the most demonstration of that was a famous race in the 80s in which former Judge Steve Erickson beat Kathy Connell for a seat. He won by 1 vote. His brother voted absentee from London. Her 2 adult children, as I am told, did not vote in that election. He wins by 1 vote.
I'm sure they're not invited to Thanksgiving dinner anymore.
Larry Connell is actually head of, Kathy Connell's son is retired from the United States military as a full bird colonel, and he is now head of the VA hospital in Washington, D.C.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And
he still regrets that vote, though.
He still regrets not making that vote. So this is a real race. This is one of the targeted biggest races running on the House side. Lancia's a Republican, obviously. Most recently, he got into a little spat with Minority Leader Patricia Morgan on an issue related to use of staff within that office. What's your take on his tenure in the House, and what makes you the better candidate to represent the 16th district?
Well, I mean, he's been there a short period of time. This is his 2nd term, I believe. It's the end of his 4 years.
Yeah.
He beat Mr. Palumbo back in 2014, and he's been up there, and he's a very nice guy.
Yeah.
But I just think I could be more effective for the people of the city of Cranston. I think that it's a very difficult culture up at the State House. People want to paint it as a Republican versus Democrat, and while that may be, the Democrats clearly outnumber the Republicans, but it's about getting things done not only for the state of Rhode Island, but also for your district.
Right.
And I think that that's how I can be more effective.
So let's talk about, let's go up to the State House for a minute and talk a little bit about it. We've had really the last 2 legislative years have been a lot of agitation, a lot of frustration, I think, by a lot of members of the legislature. 2 years ago, the Speaker and the Senate President had a little falling out at the end of the session and kind of closed up shop, and people took their balls and went home, shall we say. And then this past year kind of turned into a bit of a chaos on the PawSox legislation. How do you change the culture in that it's a little more responsive, a little more open, a little more proactive in getting things done?
Well, I like to think that I'm a people guy. I like to think I'll be able to get along with everyone, and I speak for myself, but I think the majority of legislators really do want to reach across the aisle,
yeah,
whether it be right to left, left to right. And I think that that's how you get things done. You can't shut out, one party can't shut out the other. It can't be personal. There can be no personal vendettas up there. And you got to remember why you're there. You're there for the people to represent, in my case, District 16, in any other representative's case, the district that they represent. And to be effective, you have to get along with other people.
Yeah.
I will say this. I think that one of the more impressive things I've seen recently was unfortunately, when Senator McCain died. And
Yeah.
the amount of people that came forward, Senator Whitehouse happened to be a pallbearer.
Right.
The Republicans, I mean, it was both sides of the aisle getting together to celebrate a true individual and
Yeah.
forget the party that he
Right.
came from. And that's what I think is most important. And I think by doing that, we could certainly come together and mesh.
There's a lot of issues floating around right now. We're 6 weeks away from less than 6 weeks now.
40 days, I think.
Yeah, is it from Election Day? Let's talk about some of the issues that are pressing. We had a story today about the two gubernatorial candidates talking about school safety and rebuilding schools, but not talking much about outcomes. Give you a couple numbers. The proficiency at Mount Pleasant High School at the high school level on English is 9%. In mathematics, it's 4% of the students are proficient in math. Now, by the way, proficient does not get you to Harvard, right? Proficient gets you to the next grade and maybe to CCRI, maybe. What's our problem with, and this is a conversation I'm having with a lot of folks. I had it with Neil Steinberg a week ago. Gary Sass and I spent a lot of time on Monday. I had this conversation with the speaker. Why are we not performing at a level for education that our students deserve?
Well, I think first and foremost, believe it or not, I think it starts at home.
Yeah.
I think parents need to start off from a very young age, getting kids to read, doing work with their children, not expecting by the time that they go to kindergarten at age 5 or almost age 6, depending on the age of the child, that it's someone else's responsibility
Yeah.
to teach their kids. And I think we have great teachers. I think we have wonderful schools here in Rhode Island. I will say that I think that a lot of our schools are outdated, and that's a separate issue altogether. But that doesn't mean that we can't be teaching our children. And I think if we get into an approach where we're hands-on with our children, get them into doing more homework, make it okay to study, make it okay to be involved in school, and I think you'll see those numbers eventually rise. It's not an overnight solution. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's where I see it.
Is there a low expectation? Massachusetts across the board, significantly higher. It's been 30 years in the making. Started with a little bit of Governor Dukakis, but certainly with Governor Weld, and it's been consistent investment by the state. Not a much higher level of per pupil spending. It's not a money question. How do you get sort of the energy behind reforming the schools? And it's a big part of being a legislator up at the State House.
I'll be honest, I think that school and school funding and the formulas and new schools, new technology, as you and I were talking beforehand, I think that computers and iPads and phones and e-books, they're the way to go. We need to invest in our children. If we don't invest in our school system and our children, then we're going to have nothing come the future.
Absolutely.
It's a long-term approach, but we need to embrace it. We need to say, when we talk about spending money in different places, the last thing we should talk about cutting is spending in the education forum. And in fact, it should be going the other way. We should be increasing spending there. Not necessarily increasing taxes. That's not what people are looking for.
Right.
But the dollars that we do have, if we have a surplus, if we have extra money, should immediately be dumped back into education.
Yesterday, Tom Pelangio was charged by the state police, former state representative. It's been, 5, 6, 7 legislators in the last 2 years, a significant number. And it builds a perception, I think, by a lot of folks that there's a corruption issue up at the State House. How do you break that down? Obviously, at Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy, they do an analysis of which states are the most corrupt. And Rhode Island is usually on the low end. One, because we don't have county government, so we don't have that additional layer. And those county commissioners are always getting into trouble in Oklahoma and Texas. But as an actual percentage of elected officials, it's a low number. If you ask, and we did it on John Della Volpe's last poll, what's the perception that we have a high level of corruption? What's the disconnect, and how do we do better on these things?
Well, I think we got to do better as a culture. I think that right across the United States of America, I think that it's not just a Rhode Island issue. You're seeing it. Unfortunately, it just happened yesterday. But it had nothing to do with the State House either.
No.
And that had nothing to do with legislative. Someone who holds the title as representative holds it forever, obviously.
Right.
But it wasn't there. However, that's not the perception that's given in the media, and it looks like we have that that culture. And I think that ultimately, to answer your original question, I think it goes to the fact that we're such a small state, and everyone knows everybody, and instead we have one state house, and you can be from the state house to and from home in an hour. Whereas some people,
If you live in Westerly.
right, and
Yeah.
some people in some states though have to get a different residence.
Yeah,
in
that's right,
California, for
right.
instance, to be a representative.
Right.
So again, I think it's more the small state mentality more than anything else, and people know each other, people know the names. But again, I think it comes down to, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, how do we prevent it? Transparency. And that's what we need. Clean government, we need open government, we need open doors, transparency. That's what we need.
Speaker of the House Nick Mattiello was in last Tuesday, and we had a long conversation about a number of issues. During that week, he had a number of Democrats split off and say they wouldn't support him anymore. If you're elected, are you going to vote for Nick Mattiello if he's returned to the legislature? And are you voting an aye for Speaker Nick Mattiello?
If the speaker is elected, and if I'm fortunate enough to represent, yes, I am going to support the speaker. If he is not there, and if I'm not there, I don't. Or if
Yeah,
I'm
if
there
you're
and
not
he's
there.
not, obviously I can't vote. But I do support the speaker. I think he's done wonderful things for the state of Rhode Island. I like his approach as a small businessman myself, as a sole practitioner in law. It's not easy to make a living in the state of Rhode Island, and we need to make it easier. And the speaker is very business friendly, and I think that sometimes is lost in the mix.
Let's jump across. There's a little bit of a schism. You talked about the difference between, that there's not a big difference between necessarily Republicans and Democrats up at the State House, but there's more of a difference between the progressives and the conservative members of the legislature. Progressives picked up some more, quote, seats, especially in the House this cycle, and knocked off some people or picked up some open seats. How do you, there's some violent, and I'm going to use the word violent, differences of opinion about some key issues relative to universal health care and some significant mandates, changing tax policy to tax wealthy individuals that progressive candidates ran on, serve on. What's your take? How do you build the coalitions across those two very different perspectives of how Rhode Island should move forward?
Well, again, Democrats, we do live under one roof. There's one big top. Now there's multiple families within that, if you will. If the progressives are to the left, the more conservative Democrats to the right, and there are some probably in the middle. We have to work together. And again, the Democratic Party needs to work together. We need to work with the Republicans. And I think, as noticing today online and just reading through some things, it sounds like the Republicans have to work together on some issues. And again, it's all about getting together. We can disagree with other positions, but at the end of the day, we're all up there to do the people's work, and we're responsible for the people, in my instance, hopefully the people of District 16 and everybody else, to the people, the constituents of their district.
Patricia Morgan, it's been well reported by us and other news organizations, what I would say put in a reasonable APRA request, Access for Public Records. She asked for copies of how monies were being spent relative to the windfall of the so-called Google money that came to the state of Rhode Island. By the way, it came to the state of Rhode Island not because we did anything. It just happened that the lawsuit was filed in court here. But we had a huge windfall.
We don't care how it came.
Yeah, that's
We
right.
don't care how it came.
Just showing up is
A lot
half.
of money.
Yeah,
a lot
that's
of
right.
money.
And it was, I think, by all measures, public money being transferred and utilized by the Attorney General. She dug into that issue, got turned back at every turn, tortured by the Attorney General's office, and charged thousands and thousands of dollars to receive redacted papers. What's your take on that whole process and on access to public records?
Well, I certainly think that the public, obviously, we do have access to public records. That's why Title 38.2 is there.
Yeah.
But my position is such that I don't think that legislators should ever have to pay for access to those records. I think, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, we have the issue of transparency, and that's what it's about. This is, in Rep. Morgan's case, in Lita Morgan's case, it's an issue of checks and balances. She's working almost in an oversight capacity.
Right.
She's trying to find out just where the money went. That's all. And to charge her such an exorbitant amount, to me, is offensive. I think that the statute needs to certainly be amended so that if in their official capacity, if a legislature, a senator, a representative is looking for something from a state agency, in this case, someone from the executive branch, that they shouldn't be charged for those records. It's plain and simple.
What about the broader, folks like the media? Media submits, I'll tell you, there's no rhyme or reason of how it's applied. You can put the same APRA request into one state agency, you'll get it back before the 10 days. It could be more voluminous at another state agency. You get, they run the clock, they push it for the extension of 20 days, they want $500, then it turns out they want another $500, and it seems to be an intimidation, a way of blocking. At the end of the day, every single thing that's in state agencies' hands is a public document, unless there's some very strict restrictions as to what can't go forward and be released to the public. Personnel records, some contractual things, etc. How do we change the mindset? You know, we have this frustration all the time. We have fights. We've sued the governor. We've threatened to sue others, and we're always up for some litigation if necessary. And we have the resources to be able to do it. But there's plenty of news organizations. Once they get that bill for $500, they close up. They can't pursue that story.
Well, it's certainly cost prohibitive to a lot of people. It's cost prohibitive to the general public. I mean, there are people that can go out and do the same thing, not just news organizations. They can request those same documents that Lita Morgan was looking for, John Q. Public could ask for. And they can't necessarily afford the $15 an hour and the, I believe it's up to 15 cents a page if it's copied and so forth. And when you're talking thousands and thousands of pages of documents, that adds up.
Right.
I agree wholeheartedly. These are the taxpayers' documents. They should be seen. And that's why I want to put an exemption in the statute. I really do. I want to see that. Now, John Q. Public wants to see it. Well, he may have to pay for something to that effect, okay? But we're talking about oversight. Mm-hmm. We're talking about transparency. And how do we change that? We give the documents. I don't mind the 10-day period. That's not a big deal.
Not a big deal.
There are some agencies, for instance, that are overwhelmed to begin with, and they have to assign someone to necessarily find the documents. I mean, but we're in a day and age that we were discussing earlier. Data. You know, we have flash drives. We have other ways.
I mean,
there are other ways of
we are
getting the documents.
owning a news organization that works in multiple states. We are far, far behind other states. In many states, the documents can be turned over instantaneously. The statute really, from our standpoint, needs a review and needs to be much more aggressive. And the enforcement right now sits at the Attorney General's office, and under this Attorney General, who leaves at the end of the year, has not been exactly diligent in enforcing the public's right, certainly on a consistent basis.
Yeah, it needs to be consistent. Like I said, 10 days is not a lot to ask. And I understand some agencies will probably get it done in 1 or 2 days.
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
may have someone that's assigned to it. Others, including the Attorney Generals, and I'll defend the Attorney General on this, they are the biggest law firm in the state of Rhode Island. They have a lot to handle.
Yeah. All
the criminal cases and all the civil cases. And it may require them to diverge some people from where they're assigned to work to maybe do some records reviews. So it may take a little bit more time. But 10 business days, 2 weeks in the work week, I think that's appropriate. And unless there's some valid reason, I think it should be turned over. There's no doubt about it.
Closing argument, you've got an opportunity to talk to voters in the 16th district and their friends and cousins who are going to talk to them this weekend. What's your argument for being elected this cycle in November? Folks are going to the ballot. Why should they vote for you over Representative Lancia?
Well, I mean, I certainly, just as I said earlier, I can be effective up there. I can reach across the aisle. I can be as effective with the Democrats as I believe I can be as effective with the Republicans and leadership, whoever that leadership may be. I truly hope that Speaker Mattiello is back up there, and I look to put in bills that are effective for District 16. I want transparency. I want open government, and I will tell you that, as you hit the nail on the head, I want us to focus on schooling. The referendum issue that's coming up on
The $250 million to improve public schools
I
around
would
the state.
plead to not only the people of District 16, but the people of the state of Rhode Island to make sure that that referendum passes, because that's the only way we're going to fix the schools in the state of Rhode Island. That's the only way, and then from there, we build our future with our children.
That's great. Candidate for state representative, District 16, Chris Millea, here at Go Local Live in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I want to thank him for being on. We're going to be right back after a quick break, and it'll either be me or Kate Nagel. No idea.